Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Judy Blake, and I'm a program coordinator with Family to Family Network in Houston, Texas. We are very happy to have you join us this afternoon. We are going to be discussing transition and the IEP and creating a plan for the future. So I am joined by our executive director, Mary Jane Williams. Want to say hello?
Hello,
And
everybody.
yes, and Christina Zavala. I'm going from left to right on my screen.
Hello, welcome everyone.
And Leslie Lawson.
Hi, everybody.
And Leonela Castillo.
Hi, everybody.
So thank you so much for joining us. There's our contact information and how to reach us. Next slide, please. So we realize there's just a few of you on today, but more of us will be joining. So could you let us know, and you can just type it in the chat box, yes, you're ready for your child's future without you, and you're using the transition plan to help them reach their goals. You think you're using the transition plan somewhat, and it will help your child reach their goals, or you have no idea, no clue where to start. If you could type one of those answers in the chat box, that would be great. Okay. And some of you, a couple of you actually sent privately to me, so no problem at all. Thank you so much. Next slide, please.
What were the results, Judy?
Somewhat and no clue at all. So that's why we're glad that you're here, because we believe that by failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail. And we're so happy that you have joined us for this webinar, because the importance of having a plan is critical to preparing for the future. Next slide, please. So your loved one needs you to be all in. And we know that our parents are very, very overwhelmed. We know that there is so much going on in your life and you're very, very busy. It's best if you have a plan, and you know the expression small steps or baby steps. That's okay. The important thing is to move forward and to take those steps. If you're feeling stuck, just keep going. That's the important thing. Think about your child's life if you don't take action, because if you don't have a plan, then you really can have issues once they turn into adulthood. Next slide, please. So transition means, as far as what educators see, further education and training, employment, and independent living. That's what educators see. But for families, next slide, please. This is what families see. And you can see that the graphic on the right-hand side, there is a lot for families to consider. We know that it's overwhelming. You're thinking of college, you're thinking of day programs, the different kinds of day programs. When your loved one turns 18, you would want to consider applying for Social Security. There's transition to adult health care, bank accounts, transportation, housing, special needs trust, ABLE accounts. So there is a tremendous, tremendous amount to consider. Just know that schools, their goal, their purpose is employment, post-high school or college, and independent living. That's what the school's thinking about. Families are thinking about all of these other things. Next slide, please. So it's important to think of, what do you want adult life to look like for your child? And that can mean different things to different people. What we don't want, and you're going to hear us saying this multiple times, is we don't want our kids graduating to the living room couch. So maybe they could be volunteering. Maybe they could be going to a day program. They might be doing something in your place of worship. They might be working part-time and then going to a day program at other times. They might be going to social skills classes. The important thing is that you're on this webinar and that you're thinking, what is life going to be like and what will the vision be? Next slide, please. So within your IEP, there is a transition plan. And that transition plan in the IEP, it's preparing students for life after high school. It could be higher education, employment, and independent living as much as possible. So there's a great website if you think that your child might be interested in college, and it's called thinkcollege.net. And it has all different kinds of programs that are available to our students, to our kids, that make those accommodations that might work for them. If that's not for your child, like that wasn't for mine, I just knew that college wasn't going to be his thing. Was it going to be an adult day program? Again, we just don't want them graduating to the living room couch. It's important that parents remember that your child can attend public school. They're called post-high school programs through their 21st birthday, as long as they have goals and objectives to work on. And if you think that they're not prepared for life after high school. So school districts are supposed to have these post-high school programs. If you want, your child can walk at the graduation ceremony with their peers, their friends. They would not receive the diploma at that time, and they can still come back for what we call those 18+ services. We have parents that call us all the time. Their child is 19, 20 years old. They graduated the year before, and they had no idea that their school had post-high school programs. These are free programs. And if your child can qualify, it's an ARD committee decision, and there's a need, it's important to take advantage of that. So your son or daughter, they should be allowed to stay in the public school through their 21st year. They just need to have those goals and objectives to master if there's more that they need to prepare for life after high school. If the school says, nope, they're all prepared, then you need to disagree. We do have a training class on how to disagree. And if you would like that, just email us and let us know, and we'll be happy to send that to you.
Judy, I'm
Next
just
slide,
gonna
please.
say something.
Sure.
I was just gonna say, I often run into families at transition fairs and they're concerned about this. And the first thing I ask, can your child get a job? And usually they say no. And then I say, well, why not? And if you think your child can't get a job, then those are the skills you need to be working on. Not necessarily job skills, but why can't they get a job? Oh, they don't have communication skills. Their behavior is terrible. They can't follow instructions. Those are skills that lead to employment. And so just think about why your son or daughter can't get a job. And the school's probably going to say, oh, well, we don't think they're employable, so you can't stay. So just know that, think about those questions about what's going to make them successful even if it's going to an adult day program somewhere. It's not just, they're really getting a little creative, I'll say.
Exactly. And we know this is a lot of information. This really should be a longer webinar, but we want to give you the facts that we believe that you need to know.
Hey, Judy, I was going to say too, is
You bet.
don't think your student has to fit into their program.
Absolutely.
It's services, not a place, because for instance, Mary Jane's son's post-second 18+ services looked very different than my son's 18+ services. So it's not about fitting into some particular 18 plus program. It's about what they need to continue to work on to be ready for life after high school.
Yes, absolutely. And my son, he had his senior year, and then he had another year with some elective classes, and then he did a post-high school program. So it's different for everyone. It does take being creative. Next slide, please. Thanks, ladies. So you want to make sure, like Mary Jane was just saying, that, whoops,
Oops, so sorry.
that's okay, no problem. That's our website, Texas Project First. That's what we want people to go to when they are finished.
Yes, so much good information there.
Yes, really great information. It's in both English and Spanish, written by parents for parents. There you go, Leonella, no worries. So just make sure that the IEP goals are written to have your loved one be as independent as possible. Make sure that they're working on those issues, bathroom needs, running away, communication. A school shouldn't be saying to you when they're in their senior year at high school, no, they can't stay because, they wouldn't qualify for one of our programs. Well, we need to get creative so they do qualify for one of your programs. And Leslie, I'm going to have you talk about this part here about A and B.
Oh, okay. So
Oh, yeah,
Sweet.
there we go.
that's okay. I have it. So I just wanted to talk about a little bit in your transition plan, and Mary Jane, feel free to jump in if anything's changed since Cameron. So if your child is going to graduate by an IEP, they're still going to get a diploma, but if they're graduating by their IEP, there are 3 different ways they can graduate by meeting one of the following: full-time employment, and full-time employment can mean a different amount of time for each student. It doesn't mean necessarily 40 hours a week, or demonstrating mastery of specific employment skills and self-help skills that don't require ongoing and direct support or access to services. I never like to see access to services checked, because to them, sometimes they think, oh, this student has a Medicaid waiver, or this student is getting help from TWC, or this student gets SSI. They think that lets them off the hook. It really doesn't. But I really prefer to see A or B checked because it's more meaningful. And, having my son who has autism and an intellectual disability and doesn't have a whole lot of language, when I first started going to trainings like this, I'm like, how does this apply to my son? But it very much does. And I can give an example of a friend of mine whose son works part-time, and that's full-time for him. And what did he need to work on to get to that? And don't let them off the hook.
Very good. Thank you, Leslie.
I think
Okay.
the other
Mary
thing to
Jane.
think about is when they check these boxes, it's really important as an ARD committee, an IEP meeting, to actually ask the question, what does it look like? If they've checked full-time employment, what does that look like? Let's write down so we all agree. What are the specific employability or self-help skills? What are they going to be? If they're checking access to services, ask them what's that look like? How do we know what that looks like so that we all know when it's time to graduate?
Absolutely.
It's a really important part of it.
Yes, very.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary Jane. Thank you, Leslie. And these are just some links that can help guide you. We encourage you to look at those links because there's no way we would have a chance to go through those today, but we wanted to make sure you had them. And if you would like a copy of the slides, please email me and I'll be happy to send them to you. Next slide, please. So what does a good life look like? This is a really great tool. It's called Life Course. And again, it's through our Texas Project First website, and it is on there. And we encourage you to complete this because you can't just in your child's senior year decide, okay, what is their life going to look like? They should be attending ARD meetings when they turn 14 years old. So basically in high school, all of the classes that they are taking, their electives, they should be geared toward what their interests are. What is it they like? What do they want to explore? So you want to plan that out now so that you're not scrambling when they graduate. All of their courses should be geared towards what their interests are to the extent possible. Do y'all want to add anything to that?
I'm just going to say this is from Charting the Life course, and Christina's an ambassador for them. But we like to talk about, I know as a family, sometimes we can't figure out what is a good life for my kid. This worksheet starts off with what don't you want for your child? And that's really important so that you avoid that. The other thing is if you've got kids that might have a little bit more intellectual ability, they can actually tell you what they don't want or what they do want. And as they're going through life, are they are they getting to this? Are they working towards that good life? If they're a kid with behaviors, you can throw it up on the refrigerator and just say, hey, here's your good life. Is what you're doing right now sort of heading towards a good life or what you don't want to do? Excuse me. Oops.
Thank you, Mary Jane. So true. Could you go to the next slide, please? Thanks, Leonella. So again, not going to go over the whole thing because it's very tiny in print, but this is another really important piece for you on our Texas Project First website. And it's all about person-centered thinking, person-centered planning, and how can we make that life meaningful for your loved one?
Hey, Judy, and I
Yes.
just wanted to say that if anybody's on that has young kids, even though the transition plan is not in your student's IEP till 14, you start working on transition in kindergarten because the choices you make at an early age are going to put them on a certain path. And for my son, inclusion was a big factor in helping him to meet his post-secondary goals. If we wouldn't have done some of the stuff we did early starting out, we wouldn't have gotten to where we wanted to be. So think about every choice you make and where and your vision. We talked a little bit about your vision because my vision was for Cameron to grow up and be part of the community and not have to go live in an institutional type setting. And every choice we made along the way helped prepare him for what we wanted. So just wanted to make sure everybody, because I don't know if everybody on here has older kids or not, but it starts at kindergarten.
Yeah,
It
and
does.
that's what this tool really is about, looking at all those different domains: employment, community living, social activities, spirituality, healthy living, safety and security, and advocacy and engagement and supports for the family. So all those things impact transition in a person's life throughout their life, not just at transition. And these worksheets are just worksheets. They're not to be used as, oh, we did it and we're done. You should sort of look at them every so often as a family, talk about them so that everybody's on the same page. I know Inger that used to work for us, she was like, oh, this was great for my mother who was ill and had a disability, and we could use this to sort of figure out what she really wanted. So it's not just for disability.
And also too, things can change.
Yes.
And plans can change, and that's okay. It's important to be flexible and to know that what your child may be interested in today, it may change tomorrow. Did you want to add something, Leslie?
No, you said exactly what I was going to
Okay.
say.
You're getting the best of three people here. Next slide, please. So again, what natural supports can there be? Think ordinary. Mary Jane just mentioned, daily life, safety and security, social and spirituality. So let's think of the ordinary first before moving to something that might be needed extra or special. Next slide, please. This is really important. Important to and important for. So important to, it helps people, they're happy, they're fulfilled, they're comforted. Important for is for health and safety. And the person's definition of what matters most, their version of quality of life. Whereas what's important for is what others see as necessary for the person to be valued and a contributing member of community. If something isn't important to the person, they're not going to want to do it. And it always frustrates me sometimes when a parent will say to me, oh, well, my child's not verbal, so they can't communicate. Well, their behavior is communication. And with technology today, it's definitely possible for your child to communicate in different ways through technology, through pictures. But you really have to balance what's important to them, what gives them comfort, and balancing that with their health and safety. Mary Jane, did you want to add something about that? Okay,
I would like to say something, Judy.
sure.
The thing is, especially like if you have a student that like mine that doesn't know any dangers, it's going to look very different. But I still have to let him make choices within a safe environment and thinking about health and safety. I'm not going to let him, even though he doesn't want to do something, just like with my typical child, not doing something after high school was not an option. We're not going to just not do something. So, yes, I want him to be happy, but we want to lead them to a life that is going to be fulfilling and satisfying and not isolated and lonely and not able to be part of the community. So, and I know a lot of my friends who have students that can be out in the community more than my son. It's hard to make some of those and balance that with health and safety. Your student wants to ride the bike to school or to their job. How can we make that safe for them so they can do something that's important to them? So you kind of have to work and get a balance and don't keep them isolated because you're so afraid of something happening to them.
None of us wants our kids to be taken advantage. However, they do need to be out in the community leading a meaningful life. And they need to have basic comforts fulfilled so that they do feel content and they do feel satisfied. Next slide, please. So what's the vision that you have for your child? Where do you see them? We realize that it's hard if you're on this call and your child is maybe 8 or 10 years old. We understand that, but time goes by so quickly, and it's important to have that vision, and the vision can change. We want you to keep thinking about it now, because we know that once they graduate, you don't want to then be saying, I wish I would have done this. I wish I should have, could have. So let's thinking about it now.
I think there's some bullet points that go with this slide.
Oh, okay. I don't think so, but okay.
Okay, they're
Oh,
on
yeah,
my.
there are. Okay, yes. Thank you. Thank you, Leslie. So what are their hopes and dreams? And what are they going to do when school is over? What steps can you take to help them get there? So if you map out that plan, those decisions, those actions, it all fits into the puzzle and it impacts their life. So even though the plan can change, be thinking about it now. Talk to your student. or in this case, your loved one. And if they can't verbally communicate to you, show them pictures. You know what their interests are, even if they're not verbal. You know what their likes and dislikes are. My son loves dogs. We would volunteer at a shelter. He likes food. He works in a restaurant, but he can't stand the smell of coffee. So we knew that having him work at a coffee shop was not going to be good for him. Starbucks was not going to be a good place for him because he doesn't like that. So he works in a restaurant during the day when it's more quiet and there's less people. Well, I always knew that that was going to be the vision for him. So what could I do to make that happen? And that's what we focused on. So have that vision. Next slide, please. We already talked about having that vision for the future. Next slide. So what are your greatest fears about the future? And if somebody wants to unmute themselves and put that in there, I'll throw one out. What's going to happen to my loved one, to my son, when I'm no longer here? That's really scary for me. And I think that's scary for a lot of parents. Does anyone want to unmute themselves or type in the chat box what their fears are? Leslie, what's a fear that you have?
The fear of what's going to happen to Cameron when we're gone, when my husband and I are gone, that's what really motivates me to get all the pieces in place. And the pictures on this slide kind of, or the pieces that we're still working on to get in place. How is he going to be cared for? How are we going to have money to care for him and services, and who's going to be the person to be his guardian when we're gone? Where is he going to live? Who's going to make sure he has all the right medical care? And so I know this isn't part of this, but part of a transition too that we haven't talked about too is going to be a letter of intent that has everything there for who's going to take up after you're gone. And so that kind of gives me, I still need to do that, and it's a work in progress, but it'll be like mapped out for somebody so I can feel like he's going to be taken care of the way I think he should be taken care of. So
Absolutely. And for my son, I have everything written down and it's in this one folder, and it's along with the wills and the special needs trusts and everything, because we never know what tomorrow is going to bring. And it's really important that everything is written down. What we don't want is for your loved one to be thrown into a situation should something happen to you and there's absolutely no plan. So having things written down is a huge, huge difference for the other family members helping when you're no longer here. Next slide, please. Yes, Martin, good point. Who is going to care enough to watch over him and do it properly? I couldn't agree with you more. And Martin, if you could private message me your last name so I can mark you on our list, I would appreciate that. Thanks, Martin. So how can we turn those fears into goals or part of the transition plan within the IEP? Next slide, please. And here we go. This is a really great website, National Technical Assistance Center on Transition. And I realized, again, this is a very text-heavy slide, but what I'd like you to do is you can see the link there, and you're looking at the in-school predictors of post-school success. And you'll see, and I realize it's a little bit light, but inclusion in general education, career awareness, those kinds of things are very, very important. And if we look at that now, while our kids are in high school, then their post-school success will be that much greater. So again, we don't have time to go over all of it, but we encourage you to look over that. Thank you, Martin. Next slide, please. So the purpose of IDEA, and if you're on this call and you just need a little refresher, Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act. The goal of IDEA is to ensure that our kids with disabilities, they receive a free, appropriate public education. You've probably heard of FAPE. That's the abbreviation for it. And we want to make sure that that public education, it emphasizes special education. It emphasizes related services like social skills, speech therapy, and it's supposed to meet their unique needs. So for example, my son's plan was very different than Leslie's, which was very different than Mary Jane's or Leonella's. But IDEA is to prepare our kids for further education, employment, and independent living. That may not be what your child wants or what is going to work for them, but that's the purpose of what they're being prepared for. And everything that you do in school and that is written in your IEP is supposed to prepare them for when they graduate. Next slide, please. And Leslie, feel free to jump in, and I'm probably going to have you take over from here, but feel free to jump in.
All right. So a lot of times I talk to people who have kids that are transition age and they don't even know that the transition plan is in the IEP. So get your loved one's IEP out if they're age 14 and older and find that plan and see what it says, because if you don't know it's in there, the school probably filled it in, and you know your kids best, and we don't want we want to work together with the school, of course, but you and your loved one are going to be the one that drives the transition plan. So we definitely want to know what's in there. So a lot of people get confused, and one of the presentations I went to, and maybe Mary Jane did it, was on transition and how you kind of work backwards. What is the goal for life after high school? And then that's not what they're going to work on. That's not the goals they're going to work on. They're going to work on what gets you to those goals. And of course, we want the transition goals for independent living, education, and employment to be realistic. Just like with my typical son, if he would have said, "Oh, I want to be an astronaut," I would have said, "Well, Travis, you're not that good in math and science, but you're really good in communication and language arts. Let's look at some." I'm not saying you want to tell them they can't do anything. And plus, you want to know why that's what they want to do. And Mary Jane, I love Christopher's story, and you can jump in at any time. But like Christopher wanted to be a fireman, but Mary Jane finally figured out why he wanted to be a fireman, because he liked the uniform. So what could he realistically do where
He loved the big stuff.
yeah.
Mhm.
And it's led to a lot of great things for Christopher, because he works part-time at Dig World, and he got his license to drive a forklift. And so we do want it to be realistic. And so what course of study are they going to have? And there's some slides further down that are going to explain this better. How are we going to coordinate the services? What are their annual goals going to look like? And then, of course, we want to talk also about guardianship and alternatives to guardianship, because once they turn 18, you are no longer their guardian. So do you need legal guardianship, or can they consent to a supported decision-making agreement or power of attorney if needed? And so, and if you don't have guardianship or anything, you definitely want to have some type of supported decision-making agreement when they turn 18, so they can say, "Hey, I still want mom and dad to participate in the IEP meeting and help guide me." Mary Jane?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, the post-secondary goals that they create when they're 14 are probably not gonna be the same goals that they have when they get to be a junior in high school. So those can change every year. It shouldn't be the same thing from 14 to 22. Unless, I mean, maybe that's the case, but I think as kids, they're going to grow and they experience new things. I know a friend of ours, he thought, that his employment goal was to work at Subway because he liked, so he did the whole culinary thing and got his food safety certificate. And that's when he realized, you know what, I don't like this. And so he had to
Yeah.
change. So don't feel like those post-secondary goals are written in stone. They are fluid and can change.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I have another example. I like examples. I hope y'all do too, but it helps me see it better. Is a friend of mine's son. He wanted to be a vet tech. And so what did they do? They went and looked at Lone Star College. What does it take to be a vet tech? Well, they had to have a certain level of math and language arts. And as the years passed, even though the school was working to get him to that level, by the time he got to be a junior in high school, they saw that wasn't quite the possibility, but how could he still work with animals? And so in his 18 plus program, he of course went and learned how to do came back for services and worked on interviewing skills, filling out applications, resumes. But the other part of the day, they would bus him to a animal shelter where he volunteered, and all of that volunteer work there eventually led to a job at an animal boarding place. And now he works for a veterinarian. Even though he never got the vet tech certificate, he's living his dream and working with animals. So that's just one example. Next slide, please. Age appropriate transition assessment toolkit. Again, this is that website we talked about earlier. It's going to give you a lot of good ideas. There's going to be informal assessment, formal assessment. A transition set assessment is not just the little checklist that they're going to put in your IEP. And it can be different for everybody, but like my son had a very formal transition assessment, and it gave us a lot of great information about what he could and couldn't do. And the beauty of that too is it was done by people that knew him at his high school. And instead of then waiting till afterwards and having TWC do it, and it's people that don't know them. Um, I don't know, Mary Jane, do you want to add anything else about this slide?
It's really about having a variety of assessments, not just one.
Mhm.
And for each kid, it's going to be different as to what you're doing, but um, it shouldn't be just one sit down and do a little worksheet, and that's what the solution is. So, and if that's what they're doing at age 14, then it needs to be maybe a little bit more comprehensive as they get older. So
Yeah,
that's
very
all.
good.
It's almost like doing an evaluation to be qualified for special education services. You're looking at, okay, don't just rely on one assessment, look at a variety.
Right. And we're thinking about employment and higher education. Um, for some of our students, it's going to be things that are already in their IEP goal, like working, communication is a big thing. What are the big things? Communication, behavior, in independent living. Can they take care of their bathroom needs appropriately? So it doesn't have to be like a specific employment thing. Oh, unmute Mary Jane.
Judy, did you include that transition assessment
Yeah,
thing.
that's the next
Yes,
slide.
that's
Oh,
in
okay,
here.
good.
Yes.
Next slide.
Yeah.
Leonella. There we go. And this slide talks about, your Mary
It was
Jane, you
another
wanted,
one. That's all.
you were
I'll
thinking of
remember
a
when you get
different
to
one?
it.
So transition assessment is to find their strengths, preferences, and interest. And it helps you to generate goals. Here's another good website. And you're going to talk, the transition assessment is going to find their strengths, their limits, disability awareness. Can they be persistent at something? It'll look at employment. It'll also look at independent living skills and what kind of community supports could they use, because a lot of people can work. I know a young man that works in Walgreens, and he needed a little bit of help from a job coach to get started, but then the other people that work there were able to help support him in that job. Mary Jane, I don't know if you want to say anything else about this.
No, this one is just an option of an assessment you can do. It's more for individuals that are probably college or employment bound, rather than a younger or a person who might be nonverbal. That's all.
Okay, next slide. And then we talked about this earlier about, it begins at a young age. So next steps to independence, skills and strategies. And it just helps you plan. And this is another good tool at Texas Project First.
It's actually a tool that was developed by the Transition Network, and it really starts at age 0 to 3. And what are those skills that a kid age 0 to 3 does in choice making and decision making, goal setting, self-management, self-determination? Because self-determination and self-advocacy, well, self-determination especially, are required as part of the IEP now. So it's really great for you to go back and look at this and go, oh, if you have no idea what your child should be working on, go back and look, what are the 0 to 3 skills? What are the 3 to 5 skills? What are those skills for early elementary? What should they be learning and doing at those ages? And I think it'll help you with some of those goals you might be thinking about. I just find it's a really good tool to use if you're just clueless about what sort of goals maybe they need to be working on.
Yeah, and that can happen a lot, especially if you only have your child with a disability and don't have other typical children that kind of help these things too. Next slide. So you want to develop post-secondary transition goals, and these are the areas we're going to target. And you want to make sure the goals are measurable and age appropriate transition goals. And this is just a form to kind of help you start thinking about that and filling it in. Don't be afraid to put things down. And like Mary Jane said earlier, it's going to change over the years, and that's going to be okay. Don't, just like it might for your typical child, their interest and what they want to do and the skills they develop may change over the years. So definitely want to look at this every year. Next slide. This is another very important thing. Look at your child's post-secondary goals, and do they match their vision and your vision? Because a lot of times I'll see something by looking at a transition plan, and it'll say something that maybe they like to put down just cookie cutter stuff like, oh, they're going to be a bagger at the grocery store. Well, that's not necessarily your vision or your child's vision. Or they may have something like, yeah, I saw one that where a friend of mine's daughter loves country music and she wanted to be a country music singer. Okay. You know, that's not really realistic, but you can channel all of that, just like Mary Jane did with Christopher. So you want to make sure they have a say in it too, if it's possible. And also, um, even with Cameron, you know, even though he's not able to communicate that, I'm with him all the time, so I know what he likes. So think of it that way. I didn't know if somebody wanted to speak.
No, you're good.
Okay. Next slide. And of course, we always want to start with present levels, just like we do with our IEP. Where are they now? Because if you don't know where they are now, how can you write good goals and objectives to get them to where we want to be? And so we definitely want to talk about present levels in the area of education, training, employment, independent living, rec leisure, community participation, health and medical, and self-determination and self-advocacy. Next slide. And this is an example of an employment goal to give. We like to give examples so you can think about it. This is for somebody else, but yeah, think about it in relation to your student. After high school, Christopher will work at Home Depot, driving a forklift and stocking shelves. And then here are all of his present levels. You know, and some of the things he worked on not at school. You know, the school didn't do the forklift training, um, but the school had their part, and the parents and at home had their part. And these are just his present levels. And that gives us a good foundation of what he needs to work on moving forward. Next slide. That one was, of course, for employment, but you would have that for, you know, the other areas, college maybe, and independent living. And you want to design a course of study. Of course, they're going to have to get their credits just like every other student to graduate. But you want to think about what are the knowledge and skills needed for a student to reach their post-secondary goals, and what's it going to take. Next slide. So a lot of people don't think about this, but your high school, junior high and high schools have course catalogs, and you want to think what electives and what courses can they take that fit into their program for graduation that is going to help them get to their post-secondary goals. It was really helpful. You know, I didn't even think about this. And then when looking in high school, Cameron did go to a life skills program because it wasn't appropriate for him to sit in algebra or high school level English. So he did go to a life skills program in high school. It was very good. But what other courses, electives could he take where he could be included with the typical students? And one thing, I found things through looking through the course catalog, and one was, I forgot what they call it now. They used to call it home economics, but they have a different name for it. Can't think of it. But anyway, that was so helpful for him. And also like computer keyboarding. So he was able to be included in those typical types of classes in high school that helped him get to his post-secondary goals, and maybe in a roundabout way, but it helped him know what the expectations were in those classes for behavior. It helped him learn how to communicate with other people that weren't used to being around him. It helped him follow directions and be part of whatever they were doing in a way where he could participate. So get your junior high and high school course catalog, see what's in there that's going to work for your student. Next slide. So here's a list of different graduation programs. The foundation program is 22 credits, and like I said, all students are gonna get their credits, but they're gonna still have room for electives. And now they have the endorsements and distinguished achievements, and the art committee decides if the rigor is enough to earn the endorsement. So they can't just say, your student can't do this endorsement because it's going to be too hard for them. And Mary Jane, I don't know if you're still there, but if you want to chime in, you know more about this than me.
Yeah, so with endorsements, there's usually a series of 3 to 4 courses that they need to take to get the endorsement. Some of them are not too bad. I mean, even if you look at some of the cooking skills that your son got, Leslie, some of those that just build on one another. I mean, maybe Cameron could have done all of them, you don't know. Maybe he had IEP goals, but I know for one class that my son did, it was, it was a computer class, but it was creating PowerPoints, and they did brochures and all this stuff. And he went in with IEP goals, but they realized that he could do the class without the goals. He could just do that just like everybody else. So if the art committee is the one that sort of decides, can they do the intensity of the endorsement just like everybody else? And some kids can, and some kids he can't. So it's okay.
Next
That's
slide.
just where those extra 4 credits come in, is with the endorsement, and you have an endorsement under a variety of disciplines. Again, if you go in the course catalog, you'll be able to see all those courses, and so you'll be able to make that decision. And then the performance level acknowledgement, a lot of kids, like I talked about my friend's son who did the culinary and actually got the food safety certificate. Well, that's a certificate. It's a license. He could go work in a food service industry somewhere. That's a performance level acknowledgement. And so some of our kids actually do get those business certificates or license. So you might have a performance level acknowledgement with your transcript. Try to remember if they put this stuff on the diplomas or not, or they're all the same.
Yeah, that's
Anyway.
one of the questions I had. And go to the next slide, and I'm going to let Mary Jane talk about this slide also.
So as you're planning for high school, especially if you think your child might want to earn an endorsement, or maybe they're great at band and they're going to be in band, or they're a football player, or they're a football coach, so to speak, because sometimes I have adults, young adults with disabilities who participate in football as the whatever they call
Trainer.
What? Trainers,
trainer?
that's what it is. You can see I was not involved in that. But so sometimes because of that, you're going to have to work out the schedule. For my son, I knew that I wanted him to go out for work-based learning for the half-day program in his senior year. So we had to back into those that opportunity. What did he maybe need to take during the summer in 8th grade so that he had that extra time? For some kids who were going to earn an endorsement or play a sport, they've got to take something in 8th grade or during summer at one point just to get those credits in. And that's the whole point of this sort of schedule where you can work it out. I know that all of the high school course catalogs, even though they're online, there'll be a page with a blank one like this that you can print out and figure out. But also in your IEP, they should be sort of planning this out as well for the 4 years.
And I can't stress enough about having high expectations for your child, because you are a very important member of the art committee. And, you know, like Judy always says, nobody rises up to low expectations. So it's really important to have high expectations and think outside the box. How can we do this and help our student be a part of all of this in the school community in different ways and through different courses.
Yeah, and the other thing I'm going to say is, as I said, there were required courses, so we plugged those in as to where we would take them, and then as you can see, like in 10th grade, there was construction tech, auto tech, that sort of aligned with what he wanted to do in, you know, as his employment. And then there was some career prep type classes that were required to do the work-based learning. And then our district, of course, required health and communications applications. So, and then I think as 9th graders, they also required a study hall in that first semester or whatever. So it's just things like that that you sort of have to plan out. And you guys are going to talk about the languages other than English, right? A slide in this.
Okay. I'm not sure about that slide, but I'm sure we'll get to that.
Well, I was just you see Spanish and French there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. As a student students with disabilities are required to take a foreign language too. A lot of school districts have ASL now, so that's great. But also know that they could take the first year of Spanish and then end up going and taking the first year of French if they wanted to. It's an art committee decision. So yeah, it's really pretty flexible as to what they might do for those 2 credits of a language other than English. So.
Yeah, it is flexible. And don't be thinking, oh my gosh, my student could never do that. But don't forget, your student can have accommodations. They can have curriculum modifications. Like when Cameron was in the, you know, or like Christopher, when he took auto tech, maybe he wasn't going to learn everything that the other students were going to learn, but he was going to focus on something particular that could lead to a job, like maybe changing tires. I'm just making this up, Mary Jane, but
no, and I was going to say that about Spanish and French too.
Yeah.
And, you know, some kids, I mean, all kids struggle with a foreign language. And so just because we have a disability doesn't necessarily mean we're not going to learn something. I mean, Christopher he loves foreign languages and he can pick up some basic words. We may not be conversational by the end of the year, but maybe some basic vocabulary over the course of a year. I mean, that's better than nothing and still get a credit. You know, it's an IEP goal that reduces that level of learning.
Right. Yeah, I think sometimes people forget about that. They see something that seems too hard or too big, but just remember there'll be IEP goals about what your student is supposed to accomplish in that particular course, right? Next slide. So your annual IEP goals help your student reach their post-secondary goals in all of these areas. So we really want to make sure that our IEP goals are specific and measurable, and also the objective, the short-term objectives. So we do want to see annual IEP goals in all of these areas. Next slide. What other activities would a student need to learn about or do to reach their goals? So you also want to think about related services, community experiences. I know Cameron went on a lot of community experiences. Of course, he's going to have students are going to have community experiences with their family, but you know it's different with your family than with the people at the school. So you want to allow for these things. Employment. He went to different when he was in, I'm trying to think what grade it was, probably a junior and a senior. His class would go to different um, businesses and do have employment experiences, like maybe straightening the shoes at TJ Maxx or going to a restaurant and wrapping silverware, but getting those experiences while they're in high school and having these experiences separate from their parents.
If I could just add into that, Leslie.
Yeah, go right
Yeah,
ahead,
I
Jean.
think that's really important because we all know our kids are different around other people than they are their family. It's just the way it is. And I know that with my son, he had a lot of those experiences. And then once he was in a post-high school program, they did little internships, if you will. It could be at Goodwill, it could be at a pizza place, it could be at some other restaurant. So anything that gets them out in the community is great because you never know what's going to spark their interest and what they then might want to do.
Yes, that's important. And don't forget about self-advocacy, teaching them to goals to help teach them to um, advocate for themselves, daily living skills where appropriate if they need help with certain daily living skills, and post-school adult living. And I'm not really clear on how that works into the school, but I will say this is if we don't ever let uh, our kids have, you know, sleepovers or go go to overnight camp or something like that, what is that going to be? How scary is that going to be for them when we're no longer around and all of a sudden they're living with somebody else? So think about all those things because we want them to learn things like this while we're here to support them. We don't want something to happen to us and then all of a sudden we have to go sleep at somebody else's house in an unfamiliar situation, and that's going to be very traumatic for them. Mary Jane, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I was gonna say, the other post-school adult living stuff is like voting, like this last
Okay.
year, you know, we, in the semester, if you were in high school, you know, and you were, I mean, it'd be a good opportunity to talk about voting and, um, being able to make two choices or one out of three choices, you know, I think it's important for our kids to have that experience. That's what other post-school adult living that's occasionally done,
Okay.
voting, you know, that sort of thing.
Right.
Things that you could probably, you know, other kids are thinking about at school as well.
Yeah. And I know this was on a different slide, but it just came up to me how important this is. You know, they're going to need, if they're not going to get a driver's license, they're going to need a state ID. And so you definitely want to do that because once they're 18 and over, you're going to need that. Um, so get that done because a lot of things after high school asks for identification. And, you know, while they're in school, the only identification you're going to have is like their birth certificate and maybe the schools now give them, some type of identification to wear around their neck, but we do want to make sure we get a state ID or a driver's license if appropriate. Oh,
Even to travel now, I mean, at some point, they're
yes,
all gonna have to have an ID with the yellow star on it, so, um, that's important.
yes. Next slide, please. What services does your student receive right now that may be needed after high school? Um, what are they going to need? Who's going to provide it? Do you need to find an agency or a person to help you with this? Do you need to learn how to access that service? So we talk a lot about benefits, at 18, getting SSI, getting Medicaid. Hopefully, you all have your loved one on an interest list for a Medicaid waiver program for long-term care services. That's going to be so important. And please let us know if you don't know what that is, and we can provide that information. Um, in adult care looks very different. A lot of times it's easy to get different therapies when they're young, and then when they're adults, it's hard to find people that work with adults sometimes, especially if they have IDD. So we want to learn how to access all the services they're going to need after high school that maybe they're getting right now in high school that aren't going to just, it's can be like falling off a cliff when you leave high school. Everything was provided, and now all of a sudden you have to find what you need and find how to access that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, if your child has a lot of medical needs, especially if they're taken care of at school, who's gonna do that when that service isn't available? If they've got a paraprofessional, who's gonna do that? But that transition from pediatric to adult healthcare is so important. And I know that on our Texas Project First website, we do have some resources around healthcare transition, because maybe that's important for your child to work on while they're at school. Being able to identify when they're not sick and who to call and that sort of thing. So healthcare is not excluded when you look at, post-secondary transition to other things and goals.
Yeah, and I know we're running out of time, but I always like to talk about a friend of mine. Her son, he uses a wheelchair, he uses a communication device. He has, limited movement, and he just has a lot of needs and medical needs. And I always say if he can work, anybody can. And his his goals for transition, his was to have his own business, because if you have a business, we know a lot of people with disabilities that have started their own business. Just like any business, you have people that help you with different things in that business. You don't do it all yourself. Anyway, so some of his goals that were going to help him get to his transition employment goal were things like driving his wheelchair around the school, uh, dropping things off at different classrooms, greeting people. And his business was going to be a shredding business. And so they worked on all those skills. He had occupational therapy to help him. He loved to shred and to pick up the papers. So it can be so I don't want you to think if your student has high needs that they can't do something or they can't work. This young man is a very good example. They had a business after high school called Shredding on the Go. Other people with disabilities actually worked for the company. And of course, there were supports in place to help him have that business, and somebody to help him with the employees and help him with the accounting, the books, and all of that. So you just have to have a vision and figure out how to make it happen. And that's just one example that might not be right for your loved one, but I like to use that example because it can happen for anybody if you wanna put in the work and make it happen. Next slide. Preparing for community services, that's another thing. Preparing for them to participate in the community. The government, social, rec, leisure, transportation, shopping, think about all of those because, like, I know some people in high school have goals about crossing the street safely, accessing public transportation, learning how to use an ATM card or a debit card, um, participating in different, rec, leisure things, that, do they wanna go to the pep rallies and to the, football games or baseball games? All of those things, you can have goals and objectives for that, and that's another way to prepare for living in the community. Next slide. In this one, we kinda talked a little bit about getting your ID or your driver's license, learning how to vote if they're gonna vote. And, there are different levels of guardianship. I have a friend who, has guardianship of her son. He drives, he works, he has a girlfriend, and they only have partial guardianship that allows him to do all that. And at some point, he may not even need his parents to have any type of guardianship anymore. Probably doesn't need it right now. So think about all of these things, learning how to fill out a rental application, and medical. Every time I go to the doctor, I have to fill out all these medical forms. All of these things, think about all of these things because that prepares them for life after high school. Next slide. Employment. Um, Developing, work-related behaviors, what's appropriate at work and what's not appropriate. What kind of, skills are they gonna need for the job that they think they want, and do career exploration, just like, Mary Jane mentioned about the young man that got the culinary certificate, and then he realized that wasn't for him. Um, so maybe they can have apprenticeships. Texas Workforce Commission has this summer earn and learn program where um, they place them at a business doing something that they're interested in. TWC pays their salary, but they get training. And I've seen a lot of young adults or teenagers go through that program and that lead to employment after high school. So, these are the 4 phases of work-based learning. So, most of our students are gonna be have a work-based learning program in high school, and they're gonna have career exploration, career assessment experience, work-related training, and cooperative work experiences. There's so much they can do in the school in those areas for employment. Next slide. Daily living skills, if needed. So, a lot of these skills you're working on at home, but do they need to work on them with someone else too? And the high schools definitely do have things set up at the high school that students can work on in these areas that prepare students for adult living, and the skills they're gonna need. And independent living is another thing. It's gonna look very different for each, student. So, like for Cameron, everything that he can do that we can teach him to do in the area of independent living, maybe he'll probably never live totally independent, but we want him to be able to be as independent as possible because that's going to be helpful when somebody else is here to take care of him, because the more he can do on his own, the better, and the better care he'll have. You want to think about letting them help with meal prep. Maybe they can't use a stove, but maybe they can use the microwave. Maybe they can make a sandwich. Um, can you help them budget and learn how to spend their money wisely, paying bills, just everything listed here, caring for their clothing, making sure if they're going to have a job, they have to, make sure they brush their teeth and use deodorant, and they're clean every day. Just you got to think about all of these things. So there's a lot of things we can do in school that helps prepare them for life after high school. Next slide. And then we talked a little bit about self-advocacy and self-determination. Um, Try to start early, even when they're little and you have an IEP meeting. Bring them in there, let them at least say hi, introduce themselves. They don't have to stay for the whole thing. And then as the years go on, let them participate as much as possible in their IEP meeting. They don't have to be there the whole time, but that helps them learn how to make choices, let other people know what's important to them, help them be part of the problem-solving process when problems arise, and just prepares them to speak up for themselves. Next slide. Okay, transition services, not what will happen. A lot of people get confused. They think transition services are what happens at school. So what will happen when your child leaves school? What services um, will they need once school ends? And you want to identify what agencies are going to help provide those services, and don't wait for the last minute to the last minute. In the state of Texas, the interest list for all the long-term care services are very long. Luckily, there are some non-waiver programs that are available while your child is on the interest list. So a lot of people don't know about them. Of course, through your benefits, you should be told about them, but a lot of times that doesn't happen. So definitely, I will tell you that I learn something new every day, and my son's 33 years old. And so continue to learn. If they can be part of any of these trainings that maybe you access online or in person, bring them with you. They're taking it all in, and that will help them with their self-advocacy also. Um, can the school help you locate those services? So schools tell parents about the Medicaid waiver program interest list at a very early age, but a lot of parents don't understand what they are. They don't understand why they would need that. A lot of parents think their students not going to need some of these services because they, of course, they're going to continue to improve, but get your student's name on all of these interest lists, because 15 years from now, that's what it's taken, 15 to 20 years. If they need those services, you don't want to get on the list at that time because you're going to need them. If you don't need them, you just say no, thank you. So I can't stress that enough. Next slide. Creating interagency linkages. So there are a lot of different agencies out there that provide services for our loved ones, and Texas Workforce, Social Security, Health and Human Services. And they're all connected in some way, but sometimes they have a hard time communicating with each other. But we definitely want to learn how each one works with the other to provide all the services for our loved ones especially when they're adults. because in Texas, when they turn 18, you can apply for SSI. And I can't stress enough the importance of knowing the differences in SSI and SSDI and RSDI, and using the right terminology because it really matters. But Texas Workforce, of course, can help. They're our state agency that helps people prepare for, find, and keep jobs. And a lot of times they will pay for some things that help your student get ready for jobs. It could be social skills training. It could be maybe they pay for the HCC VAST program, which is a college program for students with intellectual disabilities. Maybe they pay regular college tuition that's in state. But they're the ones that are supposed to help your student prepare for, find, and keep a job. And then we have Social Security services. That's going to be your benefits. You can have Social Security services and work. They work together. And then, of course, in Texas, when you qualify for SSI, you also qualify for Medicaid health insurance, because a lot of parents are thinking, oh, we don't need Medicaid because they have health insurance now, but you do need it. You want to get it as soon as you can because it would be secondary. And your husband or yourself are not always going to work forever and have insurance that's going to cover your child. Mary Jane, did you want to say something?
And I was going to say about Texas Workforce, it's really important to understand that you as the parent are not going in to ask for things. Your child has to be able to verbalize, especially if they're going to go to college and they want TWC to pay for it. If you go and ask for it as a parent, they're going to say, no, that's not possible. But if your son or daughter asks, then they'll try to accommodate and figure out the best way.
Oh,
They'll figure out, if your son or daughter asks, the best way to figure out whether college is the best way for your son or daughter to become employed and how much they'll pay for.
yeah, and a lot of people that if your loved one has a waiver, remember the waiver program is always last resort. So the waiver program does have employment services, but if there's another way to pay for it, either like through TWC, that case has to be closed first before your waiver service is going to pay for it. So the same with the health, Medicaid health insurance. If you have private health insurance, your health insurance pays first. Medicaid can pick up medications and maybe pick up the difference if it's a doctor that accepts that Medicaid. Next slide. Graduation, and we talked a little bit about this. Which option you want to talk about that? Everyone, like everyone else, 22 to 26 credits, pass the STAR, and of course exams, maybe the foundation program, maybe only participate in the STAR and end of course exams. So there's many ways you can graduate, and all of this should be discussed in the IEP meeting. Are they going to only graduate by IEP? They may age out. As long as your student is not 22 on September 1st, they could go that whole full year if they still need to work on their post-secondary goals. So there's many ways that a student can graduate. So you don't want to just leave that up to everybody else. You want to understand that and participate in that discussion. Next slide. And then we talked a little bit about this at the very beginning. Graduate by IEP. There are 3 options: full-time employment, employability skills, or access to services. And like Mary Jane said, it's really important that you have a discussion and know which each one of those mean. What does full-time employment look like for your student? Or what does access to services look like for your student? Because it can look very different for each individual person. Next slide. And you know, every student is going to get a diploma, but the transcript is going to be what has all the information about the courses they took and if there were modifications or accommodations. So you want to think about, you want to know, because I find that a lot of parents don't really know, is your child graduating just like everybody else, but just participating maybe in the STAR and end of course or by IEP? Or do any of you know, I guess this is a poll, I'm sorry. Do any of you know how your child's transition plan says your student is going to graduate? If anybody wants to speak up or put that in the chat, feel free to do so. I'm sorry, I know we're going over because this is a lot of information to cover, and thank you for hanging in as long as possible. We understand if you have to leave before it's over. Yeah. Yeah, so reaching your transition goals is going to take a lot of teamwork. The school, the parents, the student, different agencies. So it is a team, an effort that requires teamwork. Next slide. Okay, we already had that.
Yeah, I'm not sure why that's there. Sorry.
Okay.
And I can take it over from here just to
Okay,
wrap
go
it up.
ahead, Judy.
Yeah, and I know you've done so much, Leslie, and Mary Jane, thank you so much for all that
Yeah,
you
thanks.
shared. Great information. If you would like, on our website under extra assistance, we can certainly help you. These are fee-based services. And if you would like us to, we're happy to review transition and the graduation plan for those people who want feedback on their IEP. If you are going to your first IEP meeting, say you have a late diagnosis for a child, let us know. We have various classes and courses for applying for supplemental security income for SSI. So those are all fee-based services, and please take a look at our website for that. Next slide, please. So please complete the survey. Again, we know this was very long. A special note, the person who is iPhone, who registered as iPhone on when they signed up, if you could please share your name, because I just need to mark you as present. So iPhone, I just need your first and last name, please. Please make sure you complete the survey. And when you complete it, it's going to take you directly to Texas Project First. One of the things I can't stress enough is the importance of teaching your loved one to speak up for themselves. My son is 30 years old, and I cannot begin to tell you how important that has been at his workplace, at his group home, in the community. Speaking up for yourself is something that we want for all of our kids. And whether or not they communicate differently, whether or not they have a lower IQ or a higher IQ, everyone needs to be able to advocate for themselves, because we want all of our kids living a meaningful life. And just remember, as we've said all along, it's going to look different for different people, and that's okay. But you always want to presume competence. You want to have those high expectations, as Mary Jane and Leslie so eloquently put, and that's what we really believe in at Family to Family Network. Thank you so much for joining us. If you would like the slides, please email us, and I'll type those email addresses in the chat box, and please complete the survey. We will have this again at 6 o'clock. And then for those who would prefer it in Spanish, it will be next Wednesday, and that's at 6 o'clock only. Thank you all so much for joining us. Have a great day. Thank you. Thank you, Ingrid.